Good afternoon, everyone. I hope people online can see me and hear me. My name is Dr. Sebastian Püschel. I'm an academic specialist in future grids and markets at the Melbourne Energy Institute. Thank you all for joining us today for the regular quarterly energy dynamics seminar with Mr. Kevin Lee, Group Manager for Reform Development and Insights at the Australian Energy Market Operator. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today we're gathered on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung people, who have been custodians of the land for thousands of years, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. For our online audience, if you have any questions during the session, please enter them in the Q&A box on Zoom. We will have some time for Q&A from the online audience and those in the room at the end of the session, and we'll try to get through as many of your questions as possible. Now to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Kevin Lee is an engineer by training with a career of more than 20 years in the energy sector in Australia. His role at AEMO covers many aspects of energy markets, including market design, policy and regulation, and he's responsible for the development and publication of the quarterly energy dynamics report, which we will be discussing today. Thank you again for joining us, and now over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's amazing how each quarter comes by very quickly. So just some highlights from quarter three, the last 3 months. So quarter three was characterized by very high spot prices. We had an average of $216 per megawatt hour across all 5 NEM regions, slightly lower than quarter two, but still a 270% increase year on year compared to quarter three 2021. There was increased operational demand. So the NEM averaged about 22,000 megawatts, and there was an increase of 2.6% on operational demand, which bucked the trend from the last couple of years. Renewable output was high at 776 megawatts. Gas output was also high, an increase of about 250 megawatts. And a continuation of the trend was lower coal output from both black and brown coal. In terms of the gas markets for quarter three, similar with the electricity market, gas prices averaged $26 per gigajoule, which is about 140% more than the corresponding period in 2021, but slightly below the average we experienced in quarter two this year. AEMO issued 2 market threat notices in late July, August, and I'll explain this a bit more later in the presentation. And in terms of the demand, there was lower gas production in the Queensland LNG sector, which helped provide some southern exports to Victoria and New South Wales. So there are some of the highlights from the quarter. In this chart to the left shows the electricity prices experienced in the NEM in the quarter. So you can see this section here, quite a spike in price, especially in July, going up to about $400 at one stage, and then it tapered off during August and September. And then the gas market, which is on the right-hand chart, basically followed suit with what happened in the electricity market. Now, some of the drivers for the increase in the electricity price, which we'll touch upon in this presentation, is a shifting of prices for the black and brown coal. Some 2,000 megawatts shift in their supply to higher prices. We also saw gas plants also shift their offers, and this quarter, last quarter, we had an increase in operational demand. So demand was higher than what was expected based on previous quarters. So all these three factors contributed to the high overall prices. And of course, the input costs have also increased. Thermal coal and natural gas, they're all linked to international markets. This curve on the right, bar chart on the right, is quite interesting. So what it shows is the energy price and the cap price. So the cap price, for those people that are familiar with the forward markets, there's a commodity that's traded called a cap contract, and the strike price is $300 per megawatt hour. So basically, the seller of the cap contract receives a cap premium for selling the contract, but every time the price goes above 300, there's a payout. There's a payout under that cap contract. So what these bar charts show is the shaded components is the prices above $300. So a cap seller would have to refund to the buyer the premium for prices which exceeds $300. So you can see here quite a large premium was captured through the cap price. And I think when you tally it all up, it's about $270 worth of cap premiums. And they span across basically all five NEM regions. Now, in terms of marginal offers, as I mentioned, the thermal black generators, you can see that there's quite a lot of prices in July which were bid into quite high price categories. Like if you take a look at this July bar chart, you've got prices between $100 and $150, $150 to $300, $300 to $500, and over $500. So you can see, compared to the same quarter in 2021, quite a large chunk of the availability was bid into those quite high prices. And as the quarter progressed, as you got into August and September, as conditions started to moderate and demand started to drop, we did see that some of the volumes were then increased to lower price bands. So you can see the cumulative amount of bids over $100 was progressively reduced as we moved through that quarter. In terms of the marginal offers, this curve on the right just summarizes the marginal offer prices of some of the major thermal coal plants: Eraring, Mount Piper, Ballast Point, and Gladstone. And these offers, these marginal offers, basically got up to about $220 in July, and they started tapering off in August and September. Why does this matter? It matters because thermal generators still supply about 60% of the overall requirements. So quite a lot of the time, if it's setting the price, these marginal offers will be a reflection of why you have high overall spot prices. In terms of the international linkage and pressures coming from the commodity price, the Newcastle coal price is a good indication of that input cost pressure. So you can see this index has been progressively increasing for the last 18 months. So in July 2021, it started off at $200. And you can see from this curve, it's progressively got up to a spot price of about $650 per tonne. Now, the rule of thumb is that translates to about a marginal, short-run marginal cost for thermal coal of about $150 per megawatt hour. So in other words, if a coal plant hasn't secured long-term coal contracts and they have to buy on the spot, the spot price will be roughly around $150 per megawatt hour. So that's a very high input cost. So in terms of price of volatility, this bar chart is quite telling. So if you take a look at the previous quarter threes, ranging back from 2019, 2020, 2021, and then 2022. So you can see that the price bands for prices over $100 is represented by the yellow, orange, and red section. You can see the proportion of intervals of pricing is all elevated. And when you compare that to previous quarter threes, it's quite telling why the outturn spot price has been quite high at that $220 per megawatt hour level. This chart on the right shows it breaks down the cap contract return a buyer of a cap contract would receive. And you can see that in July, if you just focus on South Australia, a $300 cap would have returned $50 for that bought contract. In August, that would have been about $20, and in September, that would have been about $10. So in South Australia alone, anyone that bought a $300 strike cap would have been a very prudent thing to do, and they would have received upwards of about $80 per megawatt hour on that bought contract. So this is across the board, South Australia being the highest volatility state, and Tasmania being the lowest. Interestingly, the negative price occurrence reduced in quarter three 2022 compared to the corresponding period in 2021. So just going to the operational demand, as I highlighted in the opening slide, the overall NEM demand was sitting at an average of about 22,000, which was 559 megawatts higher than the previous quarter in 2021. So we did have a wet, cold quarter, and being part of winter and the shoulder spring period, that helped with overall high demand. And the other thing to bear in mind was last quarter compared to 2021, we had COVID lockdowns in both Victoria and New South Wales. So COVID would have reduced overall demands. So coming out of COVID this latest quarter, there would have been a natural increase in overall consumption. There was lower distributed PV growth, which contributes to the overall operational demand. Operational demand is what's supplied by scheduled generators, so generators which are able to be dispatched. And this graph on the bottom just shows pictorially that there's been an uptick in operational demand. And this graph on the right is just another way of showing the same output. with the differences shown in this bottom chart. So when you take a look at the whole day, it's been the operational demand has increased throughout all periods within the day. So slide 7 shows the distributed PV for this quarter. Now, we did see a drop in PV output in this quarter compared to previous years. So it had been averaging at around 22% year on year, but in this quarter it dropped down to about 7%. Now, there's a couple of factors for that. We entered into a La Nina set of conditions in Q3, which is typified by more cloud cover and more rain. So this would have contributed to the overall lower output from distributed PV. But also in terms of the amount of installed new PV, there has been a drop last quarter. So the Clean Energy Regulator data shows that the install rates for distributed PV did drop by 30% compared to the previous quarter. Why does that matter? It matters because when you take a look at this curve, it's quite stark. This dotted line is the operational demand, which, as I indicated before, is the demand that's consumed, that's been supplied by scheduled generators or generators which can be dispatched. And this solid line is the underlying demand. So when you add in the variable distributed PV, you get overall demand. So the more distributed PV you have a removal of this demand during the daytime periods, and that's quite stark, and that's why you see that duck curve when you take a look at that dotted underlying demand curve. In terms of the supply mix, this is the sunrise diagram, which we've had in the QED. So it's quite interesting. You can see solar, grid-scale solar being a major contributor during the daytime. You can see distributed PV also correlated with the grid-scale solar. Wind makes an overall contribution across the whole day. Interestingly, gas for that quarter was also substantially higher than the previous quarter. And you can see there from that aqua color, it made major contributions to the overall generation mix from about 4 o'clock onwards. Hydro also had quite a lot of output. Later on, you see that Wivenhoe power station, a pump hydro station in Queensland, had the highest rates of generation for about the last 5 years. And then the decreases, of course, came from brown coal. So brown coal decrease across all hours in that quarter, and black coal also had quite sizable decreases. And then hydro during the middle of the day, due to grid scale and distributed PV, dropped their output compared to previous quarters. So this chart on the right just focuses on gas generation. So in July 22, it was a very big quarter, very big month for gas. It contributed about 2,500 megawatts, in a system roughly about 30,000 megawatts. So that's quite sizable. But as the quarter progressed, the contribution from gas decreased, as seen from this graph. In terms of renewable penetration, this diagram shows the instantaneous output of renewables. When I say instantaneous, it's just the half-hour output. So you can see in quarter 3 there was a record set. So in about on the 18th of September, 64% of total output was supplied by variable renewable generation for 1/2 hour. So this trend has been going up since 2019, and in fact, that record of 64% has already been broken. Last week, we got 68%, and that trend is likely to continue. And our CEO, Daniel Westerman, reminds the whole industry that we need to prepare for a situation in 2025 where there's 100% renewable energy penetration. So, in certain half hours, we're likely to see 100% penetration of renewables. And what do we do collectively as an industry to prepare for that sort of outcome? This curve on the right is just a different way to demonstrate the different plant mixes, and just highlights that brown coal and black coal plays that baseload role. But as you see from wind and solar and gas are also really quite critical to have that dispatchable power throughout the periods where there's no sunshine. In terms of variable renewable generation, if you take a look at this chart on the right, there was a 500 megawatt increase in installed capacity when you compare it to the same time last year. So that's made up of like a ramp up in capacity for like the existing wind farms, 260 megawatts of new capacity coming online, lower curtailment due to improvements in system strength, high overall usage rates from the farms which were available, but the capacity factor was decreased. As I mentioned, this quarter had high cloud cover, had rainy conditions, so the output as a percentage of the installed capacity was actually lower. The curve on the right shows the capacity factors of wind and grid scale solar. And when you compare them to the 4-year average, you do see that the capacity factors have dropped for the reasons that I explained earlier. Okay, last slide before I break for questions, this slide. So this curve on the right just demonstrates the bid stack for black coal generation. So this solid purple line is the Q3 22 bid stack. So there's been a shift of the supply curve to the left, some 2,000 megawatts. And a couple of drivers for that are the high international coal prices, which I mentioned earlier. The Newcastle thermal price is an indicator. and there was a reduction in capacity from Liddell Unit 3 closure, which meant that the existing thermal black coal plants took the opportunity to ration their output. The utilisation factor for some plants also decreased. So utilisation is what did the plant generate compared to what do they offer as their availability. So not their installed capacity, the offered availability. So you can see Araring, the utilisation had dropped. So it did generate at 71%, and that utilisation dropped to 66%. And the shifting of the supply curve would account for why that utilisation had dropped. Yep. Probably pause there, Sebastian, and see if there's any questions.
All right. So to everyone online, please post your questions in the Q&A sort of like box there. In the meantime, anyone has a question in here, face to face? No questions? Oh.
Hi, Felipe Bastarrica, PhD student at Deakin University. Thank you for the presentation. Just one question concerning that by 2025, you will have half-hour periods with 100% renewable, variable renewable output. Are you planning any reforms concerning capacity payments for thermal generation plants and so on?
Yep. Thanks for the question. AEMO is part of the Energy Security Board. So that's the market body that works closely with governments to look at long-term reform and long-term policy. So there is consideration around like a firming capacity market. The last energy ministers meeting did talk about asking the ESB to do a bit more analysis on what does a firming capacity market look like. What are the main features for such a market? So that policy consideration is currently active and is currently live, but there's no firm policy yet in terms of a capacity market. Having said that, you do have a radically different set of potential market outcomes compared to what we've had for the last 20 years. 64% now, 68% last week. Instantaneous penetration, 4.5 hour is very high. Forecasts to be 100% by 2025. So it does raise questions of what essential security services do you need so that not only do you get instantaneous supply demand being matched, but your system remains secure. So, stability, oscillations, transit, all these factors still need to be secure, because you can meet the reliability, but if it's not secure, then the system won't operate, and you'll have the threat of disruption. So yes, good question. It's been considered, but it's been considered in conjunction with a whole range of other reforms, and some of the reforms relate to more transmission, so that if you have a surplus in one region, the transmission can deliver that surplus to a region that has a deficit. Of course, there's been an ongoing rationale for more batteries, large-scale batteries. And then on top of that, there's been new type of services to encourage, to supplement the energy price. So, we're putting in a fast frequency response market, and there'll be changes to performance payments for frequency. So the fast frequency response market will come into effect in October 23, and the frequency payments will be a few years after that. But there's active discussions on things like a ramping operational reserve market. And yeah, so all these things are fluid, but yeah, 3 years is quite close. It's not a lot of time to put in the market arrangements to cater for that sort of situation.
Well, depends how many sources. Yeah, Robert here. I was going, it really depends on the number of sources that you have coming into the whole system. And as you duplicate the number of sources, that have got to be aligned and governed. Yeah, and how you then manage the dominant source.
Yeah, no, that's right. The plan mix would change, and it's just a matter of trying to balance energy with dispatchable capacity and try to maintain a secure system. Yeah.
So does that then get monitored on the acceleration of different changes, etc.?
Yes, it does. We have the reliability panel, which is a subset of the Australian Energy Market Commission. They look at reliability aspects. You've got AEMO, keeping track of what's happening with frequency, what's happening with supply-demand balance through the ESU, which is the Energy Statement of Opportunities, and then the sister publication, which is the Integrated System Plan, which is about looking at optimized generation and transmission investment. So you have all these agencies and reports, and then of course you've got the Energy Security Board, who reports to the energy ministers.
Yeah, it's been every 15 minutes in the past, is that right? Are they then increasing that?
Sorry?
Reporting every 15 minutes, is that still operation? Pretty clear.
This instantaneous penetration is continual. This is up on our website in terms of what that penetration rate is. But yeah, AEMO as a system operator is acutely aware of the implications and managing the power system so that you get both secure and reliable power.
Yeah. I was asking changes that have advanced. A few years ago, it used to be pretty arbitrary and impromptu. Obviously improved significantly in the last few years.
We will go with one question line. It's it's very well connected to what we've been discussing. So Benjamin Manning asks, what is the main concern at the moment on the 100% renewable penetration situation in 2025? Is it system strength and inertia with the lack of thermal rotating generation? What are the main concerns?
Yeah, sure. I think the main concern is we can do this transition, but we need more certainty. So I think more certainty in terms of when's the closure of some of the existing sources of supply. So, we've got Araring announcing a few months ago that they'll shut down their units in August 2025. And then there's a question mark in terms of what happens with Bayswater, Liddell's, and then the Queensland generators and the Queensland government have their Queensland Energy Plan. So it's really how do we coordinate? How do we better get the market signals and coordination?
Yeah.
So that the crossover from new sources of supply to replace existing dispatchable supply is done smoothly. So that's probably the biggest challenge, I think. I think we've got the technology, we've got the will, got the know-how, but it's just creating that set of policy prices so that you get a coordinated response without having to mandate. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge.
There is also a question about is there increasing forced outage rate for coal generators? Have you seen an increased forced outage rate? And what are the drivers behind that?
Yep. I think the ESU and the ISP did have some statistics on forced outage rates. And from memory, I think there has been a trend that the forced outage rates have gone up. So this is purely speculative. I know there's maybe one study from an engineering firm to drill down on that. But my take is, and it's just pure speculation, if you've got a uncertain future in terms of what is your output for your thermal plant, and typically these plants like to operate stable output because you've got a very complex set of arrangements to get output out from a coal plant. So typically they like to run flat throughout the whole day. But you can see from the supply and demand curves, you get a big hollow out of generation during the middle of the day. So you've got this thermal plant that typically would run flat out 10 years ago, now would have to cycle its output. And that puts thermal stress, puts mechanical stress onto the plant and onto the system that supplies, that pulverizes the fuel to run the burners, etc. So there's increased maintenance costs, there's increased operational risks, and just the change in your workforce to cater for that sort of operational regime. I think all those factors, in my mind, kind of explain why forced outage rates look like they're trending up.
Any other question in here? No, there is one last question online. David Prince asks, is there a point at which variable energy may need to be curtailed to ensure availability of dispatchable load for system security?
Yeah, look, you've got in previous quarters, you got like periods where you have negative prices. So that's fine. Negative prices means as a generator, you're willing to pay someone to stay online because the cost of you putting your plant off is more than paying to stay online. In terms of curtailment, yeah, we do see the minimum demand going lower. So, in South Australia, there's already a situation where you need a certain amount of load to keep the system stable, or you need a certain amount of dispatchable generation to keep the system stable, because that dispatchable generation supplies synchronous services like inertia, voltage, all these things which some variable plant doesn't provide. So in those minimum demand periods, in some jurisdictions, there's already levers in place to reduce the output for variable renewable generation, simply because there is a security issue if that level of generation continues. But that tends to be sporadic. It's like a last resort type mechanism. And I think as technology improves, where you've got things like synchronous inertia, synthetic inertia, if you have more transmission, meshing all regions, the need to curtail will probably reduce because you've got that better sharing.
Thank you. Shall we continue or?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. So in terms of the electricity futures, this graph on the left is quite self-explanatory. So this shows the calendar 23 futures price for the 4 NEM regions. So if you just focus on New South Wales, you could have bought a calendar 23 futures contract back in July 21. You could have bought that in New South Wales for $58 thereabouts. And you can see that it's been progressively increasing all the way up to the last traded price around the $220 per megawatt hour mark. So this futures price just summates all the factors that we talked about earlier, which is thermal coal price has gone up, demand has gone up, the linkage with gas. That means that the electricity price at times is also high. So yeah, it's quite illustrative, the futures curve. And similar story with the Asian LNG prices. That's an indicator of what our domestic gas price may be. And you can see from the spot price, it's sitting around that $60 per gigajoule mark, which is quite high. Historically, our declared wholesale price in Australia has sat around the $6 to $10 per gigajoule mark. So a $60 international price, which can influence a domestic price, is some 6 times higher. In terms of battery revenue, you can see that the revenue that batteries earn from energy arbitrage, which is this purple column. So you just focus on Q3 2022. It's quite substantial. Battery utility scale batteries made about $35 million odd in the quarter from energy arbitrage. And then other components are things like regulation FCAS and contingency FCAS make up the other bulk sources of revenue. In terms of dispatch, you can see that it's spread across all 4 NEM regions. The bulk of the dispatch of batteries is in Victoria, as represented by that blue bar. Some other info that's not shown on this chart is pump hydro. As I mentioned earlier, Wivenhoe's utilisation. Wivenhoe is a pump hydro station in Brisbane. It's doubled compared to last year, so it had very high levels of generation and pumping for last quarter. In terms of wholesale demand response, there's a mechanism called the wholesale demand response mechanism. So it allows demand response, which is dispatchable, to place a bid into the system. They receive a baseline. So in other words, what would be their normal generation? What would be their normal consumption level in the absence of that response? And then once they provide the response, the difference between the counterfactual and the actual output is then paid at the wholesale price. So you can see when the wholesale prices were high in Victoria and New South Wales, as shown by these dotted lines, you had wholesale demand response come into the play. So New South Wales was dispatched up to 17 megawatts on the 12th of July, and then Victoria was dispatched up to about 22 megawatts. So it's good to see more active demand side response. So it's just not all about supply. And it's pleasing to see that we're getting more registration for the wholesale demand response. So that level has increased progressively from 20 megawatts in Q4 21 to 66 megawatts in the last quarter. So now I'd like to talk a couple of slides about the East Coast gas market and the gas prices. So this is quite a busy chart, but I'll break it down. So this light blue line is the ACCC netback price. So that's an indicator of what would a domestic producer of LNG receive if they package their product and shipped it overseas. So the netback price, you can see, has really gone up in the last 3 quarters. And in July, the domestic gas price did actually exceed the netback price just momentarily for about 1 month. But thankfully, that's gone back as we've got more supply and decreased gas demand. Interestingly, the ACCC netback forecast is for continuation of quite high prices. So you can see the forward outlook for 2023, at least the first 6 months, is sitting at around that $60 per gigajoule for gas. In terms of the wholesale, the declared wholesale gas market, which is the Victorian market, you can see that in July there were a shifting of the offer prices from the producers. So this shows the price bands above to $20 per gigajoule. So you can see when you compare to previous quarters, there was only 10% of supply. There's only about 30% of supply priced above $20 per gigajoule. But in July, that was like 60% of supply was priced above $20 per gigajoule. So that all culminated to lift the East Coast gas price by 142% compared to the previous quarter, to an average of about $22 per gigajoule. Now, in terms of supply from Victoria, Victoria did increase its supply and exported that supply to the northern states. So when you take a look at Victorian production and the net transfers to other regions, it's been the highest that we're seeing for the last 3-4 years. So Victoria contributed net supply by exports up to the tune of about 32 PJs. This graph on the right shows the Iona storage, which is a really important major source of gas storage in Victoria. And you can see here the depletion rate for that storage dropping down rapidly from about April this year to about the middle of July. This dropped to the point where AEMO had to notify the market of a threat to the system security, and requested that gas generators that hadn't sourced own supply don't withdraw from the wholesale gas market because this is putting pressure on the storage levels. So that happened twice during July, and so that was quite a tight situation in the middle of July. That's the end of my presentation. So happy to take any more questions, Sebastian.
Any questions in the room?
Thanks, Kevin. You mentioned the forward 2023. Do you have any comments on years in advance, like 2024, 25, where they're looking? I know it's not part of the slides, but just general where they're sitting. Because a lot of people hedge 2-3 years in advance.
Yeah, sure. From my recollection, calendar 24 drops to about 140, 130 for New South Wales, which is still quite high, but it comes back down. And then the forward markets aren't really that liquid beyond 2 years. So I think calendar 25, it drops down to about 90 or around 100. But once again, it's quite thin. It doesn't trade that readily. So the markets are pricing some relief in the next 2-3 years, but it's quite elevated. So I think that's a reflection of the fact that to bring in new supply, it's a long-term issue.
There were other questions here.
Thanks, Adrian Pano from MEI. On that same chart, so those who hedged at 50, who wore that grief, basically? Which sector felt that difference the most? Was it the generators, retailers?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, that's the question of hedging is up to the individual business. You've got a market that sends the price signals, and you've got a 5-minute price. You've got prices for the quarter, prices for the year. So hedging is a combination of two mutually beneficial sides to the transaction. The generator wants to hedge because the generator doesn't want to take full spot exposure, because yes, it's happy days when the prices are high, but by the same token, you only need to go back in history to have periods where prices were low, the short run marginal. So any generator that hadn't hedged or sold the output would have been smacked. Conversely, a retail or market customer, if they don't hedge, then they're gambling on what's happening on the spot market. So both sides have a reason to hedge. It's just a question of at what hedging level. And that's a question for each business. A business might have a different set of assets, so that they're hedging internally with their own different sources of supply or generation or demand response. Or as a retailer, they might have a totally different business model that passes the cost of that spot price to the end consumer, and all they're doing is providing a billing account management service. So once again, you can't say who benefits or who doesn't benefit from hedging at $50, $60 versus hedging at $200, because at that point in time, both sides agreed to transact at $60. So both sides were happy to make that transaction at that price. All I was demonstrating was that the forward curve shows the collective view in terms of what the energy is worth, likely to be in calendar 23. So a year ago, the expectation was the outturn wholesale price was going to be $60. So hence I'm happy to buy or sell at 60. Now the expectation 6 months or 4 months from when we begin calendar 2023 is now $220. So it's not good or bad, or who makes money, who doesn't make money. It's just a question of what exposure is the buyer and seller taking at that particular point in time. I hope that answers your question.
There is a question online that I think goes very well with your question. So it's a bit long. So first, the NEM marginal spot price is not the cost to retailers. They have 85 to 90% hedges with the generators. As only a handful of coal power stations are exposed to global parity price coal, and only gas also that is only 5% of generation, then retailers do not have a huge exposure to the NEM marginal spot price. Yet the futures prices you just showed make it look like retailers are buying 100% from the NEM spot. Can you comment?
Well, I used to work for a major gas gentailer, and I think any prudent retailer, prudent is the word, with prudent risk management in place, and if their business model is not to pass through the price, the wholesale price, they would be highly hedged. Maybe upwards of 90, 95, even 100%, because retailing is a small margin business, very small margins. So it's all about risk management. So if they're not locking in wholesale contracts, and then they've locked in retail prices to the end consumer, they've got to supply that. And if they have to buy from the prevailing spot price, their business would be smashed in no time. So these retailers would be, if I reflect back on my retailing days, they'll be locking in the retail customers and then hedging that retail exposure to make sure that they get that margin, and that margin is essentially safe. Now, customers can be fickle. You got CNI customers, they typically lock in contracts maybe 2-3 years out. And then retail customers might be a bit stickier, but retail turnover in some retailers is like 30%. So unless they're acquiring new customers, they're going to lose 30% of their customers. So there's lots of turnover. So these retail businesses will always be looking at what is their exposure in terms of energy, and then making sure that they replenish their hedging so that they're not exposed to the wholesale spot price.
There was another question in the room. Okay.
Thank you, Robert here. The other area is the batteries, the development of the batteries as a buffer of this of price fluctuations, and then how they implement those buffer zones. And the other issues, the agreements between different states, and then comparing the power industry, the water industry, how they're going to govern between different states and putting it together. So if you had any comments on that, would be excellent.
So your question is in relation to governance, is that right, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of governance, the way the NEM is set up is you've got the 3 market bodies. You've got AEMO as the market body, market operator, and the system planner. You've got the AMC as the rule maker, the market developer. And then you've got the AER as the rule enforcer. And now you've got the ESB as the policy body that coordinates with the energy ministers. So that's the high-level governance arrangements. You've got the energy ministers meeting pretty much once. They're meeting once every couple of months, and so like it or not, that's the governance arrangements we have. I'm not familiar with what happens in water, and but that's the arrangements we have. The ESB has been around for about 3 years. They came in to implement the Finkel recommendations, coming from the SA System Black event in 2016. Yeah, it's a set of arrangements where I think over time should give more certainty to the policy settings, and hence investors can have more confidence that there's a long-term set of arrangements by which they can make their plans. Yeah.
All right, so there is another question online. It says, there has been talk over the years of building gas import terminals in Victoria. Is there any basis for this?